Assalamu alaikum. Alhamdulillah, wassalatu ala Muhammad Rasulillah. So inshallah we'll start this section number 6 from reading Ibn Khaldun. And inshallah today it will be the 5th chapter of the first book, which is the Muqaddimah proper. And obviously last time, meaning previously, we talked about the concept of al-Umran al-Bashari. Now Ibn Khaldun divides that into both urban life and rural life, and what are the dynamics of each. And between the two, he spoke about kingship and statecraft, because for him it comes a little bit, I mean, methodologically, it comes between them. Now, the next thing that Ibn Khaldun wants us to learn about, and as he's preparing us to understand history, he will be talking mainly about the economy. So, for Ibn Khaldun to understand history, you need to have a good grasp of what economy is. And the title is في المعاش ووجوهه من الكسب والصنائع. And the word, obviously, the modern word for economy is different. We say al-iqtisad in modern Arabic. Al-iqtisad, literally and etymologically, it means something else. So in the time of Ibn Khaldun and before that, al-iqtisad, it just meant a concept like moderation, doing something without being excessive about it, basically. Either way. Now, so the key word in this chapter is al-ma'ash. And al-ma'ash for Ibn Khaldun is basically, he will discuss it etymologically again. And it's basically, for him, it's the way you gain your livelihood, okay? And he will be talking about different groups in society. And he will tell us what are the dynamics and how it should, what's wrong about it, how it should be done, and the like. Now, since we talked about the word al-iqtisad, we said it's very modern. Modern in the sense that it was, in fact, we have a very good understanding of where it came from. So, in fact, it's a translation of the word economy, although it's from French. And it's the earliest references that we know of is in a work that was done by Rifa' al-Tahtawi from Egypt. So he was sent by during the time of Muhammad Ali of Egypt, the previous dynasty, when Egypt was still a kingdom, and to Paris with a group of young officers and students. And although he was supposed to serve mainly as an imam for them, but he turned out to be perhaps the most effective in producing documentation of the travel. And he described Paris at the time and the disciplines. And so one of the disciplines that he talked about is the economy, and he used al-iqtisad. And since then, iqtisad became the term that we use in modern Arabic. Talking also about the terminology, Ibn Khaldun's terminology is, apart from al-ma'ash, is a number of it is still used in Arabic. In fact, to the point that if you are familiar with the modern Arabic, Ibn Khaldun is very easy to read because he's that accessible. And part of it is his clarity. It's not a very complex, meaning he doesn't use expressions that are too elaborate in the sense that they are artistic. So he's to the point, and that makes that's part of its ease. Now, so let's go to this section. It has, so this chapter, as usual, he divides it in a numerous sub-chapters. In this one, it's about 33. And in this, in explaining the economy to us, he will be engaging a number of disciplines. So we might have the chance, for example, he will be discussing philosophers, he will be discussing other historians, and he will be discussing even other theologians. And that starts from the very beginning, which is the first section, حقيقة الرزق والكسب نعم وشرحهما. So for example, in this here he will be discussing what is الرزق, and it will become a theological discussion. And for instance, he will be responding to al-Mu'tazila, because al-Mu'tazila, they have this position that rizq it has to be only we can call rizq only if it is halal. So obviously he refutes that, and although he doesn't spend a lot of time on it, but he definitely makes a point that rizq, it comes in different forms, and we'll stop at that now. And then he will go to what he calls al-kasb, which is earning. Naam. And in here we will talk about two things. So Ibn Khaldun has this distinction between what he calls natural ways of earning and unnatural ways of earning. So for him, natural ways of earning are basically three. So agriculture, trade, and crafts, meaning what we call now industry. So these are the natural ways that you produce wealth. You generate wealth through these three. There are other ways, they do happen, but he calls them unnatural. We'll talk about examples of what he considers not natural. They do exist, and sometimes some of them are very respected, but they say they don't really produce wealth. Now, and another concept that he talks in this chapter, which is quite interesting, is that he defined al-kasb, which is basically earning, as the value of work that's put in something. So he associates work with value. And this is something that is very important. And in fact, in modern theories, some of them, it's one of the, for example, it will, this idea in its extreme, shall we say, was used by Marxists that focus on that work is absolutely the what gives value, and the rest is history, in the sense that means of production are a different business. Now, so then, for example, then he will move on. So وجوه المعاش, the second subchapter, وجوه المعاش وأصنافه ومذاهبه. نعم, which we talked about, the kinds that we talked about. Then in the third one, he gave us an example of what he doesn't call natural way of generating wealth. For example, administration. Administration for him, that yes, you will gain an income, but you are not really producing wealth. Naam. And another case example that he will give is something that was common in his time, and it has not disappeared. Especially if we take the example of Egypt, that a number of people, this is the fourth one, ابتغاء الأموال من الدفائن والكنوز ليس من المعاش الطبيعي. So these people, they will be searching basically for treasures. Egypt was known for that and is still known for it. And he will spend quite a time about this. That's that even if it's happened, it's more of a luck situation, and that there is a lot of deception going on there, and it's something that he looks down upon. Now, number 5, الجاه مفيد للمال. الجاه مفيد للمال. Basically, status, as in social status, is very beneficial for wealth. Okay? And we have to remember here that Ibn Khaldun, when he states certain rules, he's not making a moral judgment. He will give moral judgments later, but he wants you to understand this rule, okay? That status helps wealth. Now, because for example, he will give he will give examples of people they are trying to please a certain person, although there is technically no coercion, but because the people want to please that person, they will buy from him or sell him cheap and so forth. Now, and when it comes to status, here I would like to mention something very quickly, because there was a question last time about classes in society. And in this chapter, he will talk about classes, but we have a small text, which is here in the last one. I will read it, then we'll talk briefly about it. ثم إن الجاه متوزع في الناس. So social status is distributed amongst people. ومترتب فيهم طبقة بعد طبقة. So there is a certain hierarchy. طبقة, which is the modern word for class after class. ينتهي في العلو إلى الملوك. So the maximum, the peak, are the kings. الذين ليس فوقهم يد عالية. So there is nobody above them in society. And once again, in his society, you know, basically states and kings and dynasties, they were the same thing. In his time, there was no republic, obviously. نعم. So in the pinnacle, you find kings. نعم. وفي السفل, so the lowest part, it goes to إلى من لا يملك ضرا ولا نفعا بين أبناء جنسه. You find people who basically cannot hurt anybody, they cannot benefit anybody. نعم. وبين ذلك طبقات متعددة, and between them there are many classes. Okay. حكمة الله في خلقه. So this is, you know, hierarchy is basically a natural thing. Okay. He will say that because it's useful. بما ينتظم معاشهم وتتيسر مصالحهم ويتم بقاؤهم. Because they ultimately, so that's, this hierarchy should organize their livelihood and make their masalih, fulfilling their needs, easy, or at least easier. ويتم بقاؤهم. In fact, he goes further. That's how society survives. Now, then obviously we have classes, what he calls classes, and he doesn't go, if we can, because usually when in the social sciences, when we talk about classes, what comes to mind by default is Marxism, and Marx and the struggle of classes. Obviously, in Ibn Khaldun, the approach is very different, because he will advise you that, okay, if you are in a certain class, this is what you should do. Take care of those who are beneath you. Help them. Okay? So there is an element of cooperation. That's what should happen. Okay? It's not struggle, it's cooperation. Struggle might happen, but he's telling you, if you are in a certain class, take care of those who are beneath you, because that's what's good for you, even in this life. And then he said, as for those who are above you, and he said something quite interesting. He said, do not antagonize them. Don't have strong ill will for them. Okay? And don't, he will go to the, he will say things like, don't be too proud in dealing with them. If you need them for a service, go for it. Okay? Don't feel too proud for that. So in a sense, he's very practical about it. Now, so that's for al-jah. So we'll go back, and he will elaborate on that on number 6, and he will say sa'ada, success, and he means it in a worldly manner. Wal-kasb, earning, gaining wealth. إنما يحصلان غالبا لأهل الخضوع والتملق وأن هذا الخلق من أسباب السعادة. So in business, being humble is basically a requirement for you to gain your livelihood. And he will say that this humbleness is necessary but it also can be dangerous if you overdo it. Okay, if you overdo it, it will, you know, it can lead to basically you will lose yourself. Okay, some of it is necessary, but if you want to go this way, but you shouldn't overdo it. And here he said something. He will talking is maybe talking from experience. So he said, القائمون بأمور الدين من القضاء والفتيا والتدريس والإمامة والخطابة والأذان ونحو ذلك لا تعظم ثروتهم في الغالب. Said, as a rule, people who take care of religious matters, like being a judge, at that time it was still a religious function, giving fatwa, teaching, being an imam, giving khutbah and adhan. Generally speaking, these people, they don't gather a lot of wealth. It's just a fact. Naam. Another fact, and here he will be talking about agriculture, because Ibn Khaldun is basically, and here he's in a sense taking an usuli approach. He said, you know, there are people who function in the daruriyat, in the basics, the necessities. People who function in the hajiyat, so a little bit above that, and people who function in the kamaliyat, in basically luxurious fields. Now, for him, filaha is by default something that's of the basics. He said that's why he said الفلاحة من معاش المستضعفين وأهل العافية من البدو. So generally speaking, it's something that it's a rural activity, and usually people are not very well off, the majority obviously. نعم المستضعفين and أهل العافية من البدو. And we said because the function itself is in the realm of daruriyat. نعم. And here it's still coming. What I had in mind is still coming. نعم. So that we were talking about agriculture, and he will discuss certain traditions that were in society. And he said that generally speaking, agriculture is attributed that it was an activity of Adam alayhi salam. And he said the way you should read this, it means that it's an early necessity. It's an early necessity. And he said that this connection between activity, economic activity and profits, it comes. He will give 3 examples. It seems that certain traditions existed about that. The second example is for crafts are associated with Idris alayhi salam. So al-filaha, agriculture is associated with Adam alayhi salam. As-sana'i', so crafts are associated with Idris alayhi salam. And he said, it just tells you that, he said, read in these expressions that Adam came before Idris alayhi salam. Hence, filaha is the origin, and the crafts are much later. Now, he will talk later about another prophet. He will be talking about a specific craft, which is what we may call, you know, being a carpenter. And he will say, it seems some people say that perhaps one of the earliest ones, anyway, it's associated with Nuh alayhi salam. Obviously, he was building the ship. Naam. And but he doesn't say that he said read for it in these that these are very early activities. Now, so then he will move on to talking about at-tijara, business. Tijara meaning selling and buying. And for him, there is a certain kind of people who do well with the tijara, and they have certain characteristics, and if you don't have those characteristics, stay away from doing business. Now, which is the number 10. أي أصناف الناس يحترف بالتجارة وأيهم ينبغي له اجتناب حرفها. So the idea is, he said, merchants, they need successful ones. You know, they need to be willing to bargain. And sometimes they try to outsmart each other. Okay, and these people, they need to not meaning what's happened in society at that time, that they do not hesitate to go to the al-qadi, meaning engage themselves in lawsuits and so forth. He said, if you are not comfortable with these things, stay away from it, because he said that you will lose your capital, you will lose your money. And he said that because if you are not willing to resist injustices or competition, and especially unfair competition, people will take advantage of you. Now, he said that now these characteristics of businessmen, when they become too much, they lead to certain bad traits. And for example, you know, when people are completely committed to earning and they don't have any respect for how they do it, obviously they will refer to cheating and the rest. And he said, as a general rule, the characters and the traits of businessmen are not fit for nobility in kings. And what he means by that is that الأشراف والملوك خلق التجارة نازلة عن خلق الأشراف والملوك. What he means by that insistence on gaining money in an end or in itself is, generally speaking, far away from the nobility, where they see it, you know, as something a little bit lowly. And also because these people, they are supposed to, ideally, they are supposed to give and to help others. These people, Ashraf wal Muluk, they're supposed to help. You know, for example, if somebody wants to buy from you and give you a lower price, maybe they need it, and you should give it to them. Anyway, it's a different mindset. Once again, Ibn Khaldun is giving us general rules. He said there are exceptions. For example, obviously not all businessmen are like that, but he said that's rare. That's not the rule. Now, staying with business, he will notice certain things that happened in his time, and he gives them as little as rules. And he said that that's number 12. نقل التاجر للسلع, you know, transport of goods by merchants. And the idea here, he said, if it's to have a good consumption of your goods, you have to seek goods that are commonly consumed, okay? Because if you trade in rare things, you might sell them now and then, but if there is no general need, you're taking a chance, okay? He said, however, if you can bring things that are in need, but they are very far away, that, generally speaking, gives you a large margin of ribh, meaning what you gain, you have you have a large margin for that. And he gave an example of people who dare cross the desert from North Africa to West Africa, and they bring gold from there, and they bring also commodities from North Africa to the south. And he said that these people, they do very, very well. However, they're taking huge risks. Now, another concept that he will talk about is al-ihtikar, which is monopoly. And here he said something that is to this that we, in a sense, we were not expecting him, because he usually keeps talking. He minimize, at least he seems to minimize talking about ghaib. But in ihtikar, he started with it. He said that it has been noticed that people who engage in monopoly, they usually don't do well anyway. They might gain money in the short term, but they ultimately end up doing very bad for one reason or another. But the reason that he gave is basically from ghaib, in a sense. He said because people, when they buy from you, and especially when they buy necessities that you have monopolized, they are giving you money, but they don't like it. They feel forced. And he said that has an impact, because people gave you money and they feel forced to do that. It has a bad impact, and it ruins what he said, تعود على فائدته بالتلف والخسران. You know, all what you have gained from there, it's as a rule, from what people have noticed, that it's followed by destruction. Now, this is one case where he crosses, and he doesn't hesitate about it. We'll see later, inshallah, more about that. In 14, another rule that he noticed, that رخص الأسعار مضر بالمحترفين بالرخيص. He said, yes, he said that cheap prices are harmful for people who sell literally cheap things. Okay, meaning, yes, the society might think that having cheap prices is good. He said, but in the long term, it destroys those producers, and it comes back to how the whole society. Okay, he will give one exception. So we have a little text about the exception, 15, chapter 15. I will read it, inshallah. وإنما يحمد الرخص في الزرع من بين المبيعات لعموم الحاجة إليه. He said, yes, staples, especially things like grains, those staples, that's the only exception where you want to have it cheap. Now, why? لعموم الحاجة إليه, because there is general demand for it. واضطرار الناس إلى الأقوات من بين الغني والفقير. So everybody, whether rich or poor, they need those necessities. والعالة من الخلق هم الأكثر في العمران. And people who are in need, dependents also, amongst people, are the majority in the population. So he said, yes, when it comes to grains and staples, it's a good thing that they are accessible to everyone. In fact, he said most people are in need when it comes to that. Now, why? He said فيعم الرفق بذلك. So the situation becomes peaceful with that. And he said a little rule, ويرجح جانب القوت على جانب التجارة. In this case, the need to feed people is more important than business. في هذا الصنف الخاص, but only in this specific case. والله الرزاق ذو القوة المتين والله تعالى رب العرش العظيم. And he praised Allah using his name Ar-Razzaq, the provider, ذو القوة المتين والله تعالى رب العرش العظيم. So cheap prices are, generally speaking, he doesn't recommend that, except for the basic necessities. Not the basic necessities, especially he talks about staple foods. Now, then he moves to crafts and industry, and here he just make some important general statements. الصنائع إنما لا بد لها من معلم. So teaching and training is extremely important when it comes to crafts. And here there is a little text, نعم, because it just tells you how he thinks, and in very logical terms. So he said الصناعة هي ملكة في أمر عملي فكري. 16. الصناعة هي ملكة في أمر عملي فكري. So الصناعة, industry, is a mastery in a matter that is practical yet somewhat intellectual. So you're working both physically and mentally. نعم. وبكونه عمليا هو جسماني محسوس. And because of the fact that it is something practical, it is something physical. جسماني محسوس, meaning tangible. والأحوال الجسمانية المحسوسة فنقلها بالمباشرة أوعب لها وأكمل. And since this is something that is physical and it is tangible, the way you transfer them is by practice. And that's how you do it the right way. نعم. After that, he talks about craft, but we have seen them before. He, in a sense, elaborates more on as-sana'i', that the bigger the city. So when we talked about cities, we talked about these. The bigger the city, the more sophisticated the crafts. الصنائع إنما تكمل بكمال العمران الحضري وكثرتها. نعم. And after that, رسوخ الصنائع في الأمصار إنما هو برسوخ الحضارة وطول أمدها. So you have the size of the city, but you have also the history of the city. The longer you have a city, meaning the longer the tradition of craftsmanship is, the more elaborate it is. Meaning that you can compare two cities of the same size, but if one of them is way much older than the other, by default, the older one has much better craftsmanship. Naam. And he said, for example, you can notice that even in places that or cities that they started to lose population, especially for political reasons, and there is a new, let's say there is a new capital. Sometimes he say, don't be surprised that in the old capital, which is now much less, it's not as big as the new capital. It lost a lot of population. You will be surprised to find very elaborate craftsmanship that is still in the old town. Although he said it's the scope is way much less than it used to be. الصنائع إنما تستجاد وتكثر إن كثر طالبها. So the basic idea of that, it is demand that makes industries and crafts better and more. So it's an issue of demand. And الأمصار إن قاربت الخراب انتقص منها الصنائع. He said when cities are starting to collapse, the number of crafts, they start diminishing, meaning there is a coordination. Then العرب أبعد الناس عن الصنائع. This is talking about Bedouins, especially here when he uses al-Arab, he associates them usually people, because he will give also, will be talking also about Berbers. So the less people live in cities, the less you have crafts. For us, it might be obvious, but he said this is something that you have to remember. Talking about crafts, he just tell us that generally speaking, when it comes to crafts or any mastery, generally speaking, that once you master something, this is a general rule, once you master something, it is quite hard to master something else. For example, if you have a job and you mastered your field, to go to a new field and start anew is generally speaking very hard. He said there are exceptions, but that's not the rule. Now, then he will give us a list of what he calls the ummahatu sana'i. Ummahatu as-sana'i. A literal translation, the mothers of crafts. He will start with al-filaha, agriculture. Then he will talk صناعة البناء, so architecture. التجارة, trade. الحياكة والخياطة, textile, both making textiles and being a tailor, الخياطة. And here, for example, once again, in his hierarchy of Daruri, Haji, Kamali, he usually uses only two, Daruri and Kamali. He related them that al-hiyaka, so textile and weaving, is he will say that obviously human beings at his time and in our time, he said there is a chronology here. Of course, textile comes first, then making clothes out of them comes second, but he will relate it to that. He will tell you it's quite common in the countryside and for Bedouins that they wear clothes that are not tailored. And having the need for tailors is much more needed in cities. So once again, he gives you categories, but for him, there is a chronology also that goes with that. And here, in fact, I think in this chapter, he will say there is a reason that when you go to Hajj, you are not wearing things that are tailored. Naam. A reference to the simplicity, just to say the least. Then he, in a way, this is something that I was a little bit surprised, but he gave it a lot of صناعة التوليد. صناعة التوليد is what? صناعة التوليد is we have some doctors here, I guess. So a tawlid is, assisting the birth of babies. So he gives a specific chapter to it, and he makes it distinguished from medicine. We will talk later about medicine, and he will spend quite a bit of time about at-tawlid. And not only he will say what happens during his time, taking care of the mother and taking care of the baby, and so forth. And he will give us what they used to do and how that's important. But it becomes a philosophical discussion, and he will be referring to two philosophers major, Al-Farabi and Ibn Sina, because there was a discussion that the proposition is this: without this skill, without this craft, shall we say, if the idea was, if it were to disappear one day, that means that humanity will cease after that. Meaning after the people who are alive will naturally die. No? And some people will say yes, some people say no. And he will be responding, as we said, to Ibn Sina, who wrote Hayy ibn Yaqdhan. So for those, there are two Hayy ibn Yaqdhan, one by Ibn Sina, and the second one later, it was written in the West, Ibn Tufayl. And people who are interested in these, usually, they say, could a human being be born and survive absolutely without any other intervention? And could and so Hayy ibn Yaqdhan, Hayy, that's supposedly his name, but the idea Hayy is alive, Yaqdhan is awake or aware. And there are these theories that yes, it could happen absolutely naturally without the existence of human beings. For example, the philosophers will talk about, you need clay, and that clay has to go through fermentation, and in terms that usually the evolutionists like, and that living with other animals would help. It's a long discussion. It's very philosophical, but it was important for them, and I assume also until now. After that, he will be talking about medicine as in the art or the discipline. But he will say things that, for example, that it's mainly a necessity for urban life. He said it's mainly a necessity for urban life. And at least in his time, he said, generally speaking, doctors are almost non-existent in the countryside. And he will say, why is that? And he will talk about three things. He will talk about the diet, that people in the countryside have way much better diets. Okay. And he talks about al-hawa, he talks about the air. It's much purer and much better in the countryside. And he will talk about al-riyada, physical activity. And people in the countryside are way much more physically active. And these three, they keep them healthy. And he said that's why the need for a physician is more felt in city life. So that was صناعة الطب وأنها محتاج إليها في الحواضر والأمصار دون البادية. Now, and in these crafts there is a progress, usually from the oldest to the more complex. And the last one he talks about, not the last one, we still have three. One of the last one is الخط والكتابة من عداد الصنائع الإنسانية. So writing and documenting is part of human crafts. And here he goes, he gives a historical review. So there are a lot of historical things in this section. And he spent quite a time about what we can call how the Arabic letters came to be. And historically, basically what he said is quite right. So he will start from that in Arabia, that's how he will talk about what we call al-Khatt al-Musnad, which is in old Yemen, meaning pre-Islamic Yemen, and how it got to the Anbat in the north of Arabia. Anyway, this is all Arabian scripts. They're all Semitic scripts, and basically it's what modern historians adopt now. There are certain discrepancies, but it's basically the same narrative. Now, and talking about writing comes after that al-Wiraqa, and he means by al-wiraqa paper making. And what we need to know about paper making, that writing existed way much before paper. And one of the oldest, people, for example, in Mesopotamia, ancient Iraq, I mean, they wrote in clay. Then for example, the Egyptian civilization, it used papyri, which is a naturally grown plant. But we'll talk about the history of Islam and how that the early state, meaning the Umayyad especially, and even a little bit before that, they mainly used what they call it, parchment, meaning the skins of sheep and the like, and that it was later in the time of Al-Abbasiyun where this craft was adopted. So al-wiraqa, the paper, it was basically learned from the Chinese. Nah. But once it was adopted by the Muslim world, there was a huge boom, and from there it went to other places, namely Europe. And he used for the al-wiraqa, so of course, we generally speaking in modern Arabic, we say al-waraq for paper. Excuse me, al-waraq. But the word waraq originally it meant leaf, as in the trees. So Ibn Khaldun, when he talks about paper, he will use the original word that was borrowed, which is al-kaghid, kaf alif ghain dal, kaf alif ghain dal, which is still used in certain Arabic dialects, and I think in also in some aspects of Persian. Now, then the last craft that he talks about, although he doesn't necessarily approve of it, in fact, basically he doesn't approve of it, but he will talk about it, صناعة الغناء, music. And he put it the last one basically because he said it's something that happens usually, it becomes more common when society and civilization is reaching the maximum and the time of luxury is becoming the norm. And for Ibn Khaldun, that's also how civilization starts to slow down and go downward. And he will give us a very detailed about the craft of music, its history, and how it is something that it's in his time it was. He will talk about how it is coming in Europe and how it's coming in places like China and so forth, and it goes hand in hand with royalty. With royalty is something that was associated with royalty. I mean, in our modern time, we have a different experience, but in his time that was a luxury thing, and because to afford to be able to afford to listen to a professional musician, that was not something very accessible to everyone. Naam. Especially the deeper we go into history. There were نعم. So and صناعة الغناء, and here he will go into he will talk about al-ghina, he will talk about its history and how it was introduced in Muslim countries, and briefly he will discuss also at-tajweed. نعم. The last chapter, it will just make a conclusion that crafts as a whole, الصنائع تكسب صاحبها عقلا وخصوصا الكتابة والحساب. Is as a rule, craft, being involved in a craft, is something that helps. It helps your intellect. تكسب صاحبها عقلا وخصوصا الكتابة والحساب, especially writing and math. Writing and math, they sharpen your intellect. And for him, he will give a small definition of intellect, which is here 33. and he will define it as so ملكة الانتقال من الأدلة إلى المدلولات وهو معنى العقل النظري الذي يكسب العلوم المجهولة. ملكة الانتقال من الأدلة إلى المدلولات, the ability to move from proofs to their significance. نعم. From the signifier to the signified. وهو معنى العقل النظري, and that is so العقل, you can even translate it here as logic. نعم. or العقل النظري. So it's abstract logic. It's rather loose translation. الذي يكسب العلوم المجهولة, which allows you to learn unknown information, unknown knowledge. نعم. So inshallah, we'll stop here and we'll open the door for questions if there are any. نعم inshallah.
I was just curious, is in reference to class systems.
نعم.
How would Ibn Khaldun feel about the lower class striking against the upper class? So
in his time, that wasn't the case. In his time, striking, you mean in which sense?
Like, for example, teachers striking against the government they work for.
Yeah, for him, he is definitely in a different society, and for him, teachers are not the lowest class. Yeah. So it's just the time is very different. The time is different, very different. Now. Now, if the sisters have a question also, inshallah. As a whole, he promotes cooperation as much as possible. As we said, that you are supposed to take care of those who are beneath you, and try not to antagonize those who are above you. That's in a sense, it keeps harmony in society. No.
Dr. Choukri, we have a question online.
No.
You have said that modern can easily read or identify with Ibn Khaldun, yet it is remarkable how much modern life differs from Ibn Khaldun's normative rules of life. We may think of corporate food and physicians residing in rural societies. Is it fair to postulate that he would deem modernity/postmodernity as a disease of sorts, or be critical of its forms of life, or seeing it on its way down?
Ibn Khaldun, so there are many questions there. So obviously, Ibn Khaldun is not a modern person in the sense of modernity, meaning the philosophy of modernity. Okay, although he emphasized a lot on the physical rules of the universe, but for him, that's not everything. What he's telling you, do not ignore them, because if you ignore them, you will pay for it. Okay, but that's not everything. But for example, when he talks about monopoly, today we talked about it, that one perspective that he took is that yes, in the short term you can make money. However, because, and he said the nufus, the souls of those people who were forced to pay you were attached to that what they gave you, that money will end up by default, generally speaking, lost. You will have to lose it anyway. So in certain aspects of modern life, he definitely sees this is a different level. Certain aspects of a modern life, he definitely sees them as aspects of luxury, and that's generally speaking a sign that things will go downhill. However, we can't generalize too much, because even in one country, the situation differs depending on the areas and the social milieu. Naam. Could you read the question again so that I can pick up something else, inshallah?
You have said that modern people can easily read or identify with Ibn Khaldun. Yet it is remarkable how much modern life differs from Ibn Khaldun's normative rules of life. In parentheses, we may think of corporate food and physicians residing in rural societies. Is it fair to postulate that he would deem modernity/postmodernity as a disease of sorts, or be critical of its form of life, or seeing it on its way down?
Naam. So one thing to add is that, for example, especially in previous lectures, we said that we have to remember that Ibn Khaldun is speaking in a pre-industrial society. Pre-industrial society. And yes, now, for example, physicians being, but even, for example, even in this country, physicians, from what I understand, there is a need for more physicians in remote areas. They are not abundant. So this, at least the need is still there. However, it's a different time. It's a different society. What I said, that he is accessible to modern ways of thinking because modernity is highly materialistic, and he deals with that. He deals with that. However, he doesn't only deal with that. For him, that's perhaps the body of the society, but he will later mention, shall we say, the spirit of the society. I hope that was helpful. Any other questions, inshallah?
Just a comment. Tawheed, I would say, is midwifery.
That's a good one, yes. Midwifery, yes. So if we don't have questions, thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum.